We're doing a 3-part series on the top mistakes churches make when talking about money. So Dan, what is the first mistake?
Well, ironically, the first mistake churches make when talking about money is actually not talking about money.
So why don't pastors talk about money?
Well, I think there's several reasons. Honestly, it's kind of uncomfortable. The idea of talking about money, it just, in general, in our society, it feels kind of taboo, off limits, something that you just don't normally have those kind of conversations. And so I feel like that's a big part of it. But there's other things like, they don't want to feel like they're begging for money, or, they might not understand their finances. So they're not super confident talking about money in general.
Why is not talking about giving at your church a problem?
Yeah, great question. It seems like, it could be scary, can't be taboo. And it just feels like, I don't need to talk about money. But the problem is that if churches aren't talking about money, then people aren't going to know a biblical perspective, because the only other way they're going to hear about finances is through the world. And they're certainly not going to hear a biblical perspective that way. So it's really important that as a church, you're talking about stewardship, generosity, and money and good principles. And I'll say this is also, it's not just about talking about money for the sake of getting money. Jesus makes a direct connection between money and a person's heart in Matthew 6. He says, where your treasure is, there your heart is also. So there's a direct connection to discipleship here, right? And here's the thing is, if we had some sort of gauge that we could do for people's prayer life, and we could say, okay, I can put this indicator on every person in my church, some sort of tracker, and then you would know, okay, how often they pray and how faithful, how much dependence they have in their prayer, how, anything like that. It seems super creepy, but we'd be like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like I could judge the health of my congregation through prayer. Well, we actually have something that is kind of a metric base, which is giving and generosity. And Jesus makes this direct connection. And so this is a discipleship issue. This is not just about raising money for the church. In fact, that's kind of secondary. I think the primary thing is, how do you teach people healthy finance for the discipleship aspect and get their heart right? And then as a result of that, sure, the money that comes to the church is going to grow. But that's kind of secondary, and that's going to fuel more mission. So that's really important. But the primary thing is the discipleship of those people.
What does discipleship, when it comes to money and finances, look like in the church?
Yeah, I think it's an intentional pathway or donor development process that you have. And so part of that is talking about the reality of your finances and how church finances work. Part of it's offering classes to teach people, and part of it's teaching on it regularly on Sundays. If we at church talked about money as often as Jesus did, we'd be preaching about money every month. We shy away from it, but it's actually a critical piece to be talking about. And the statistics are crazy, because if you look, of the people that are giving, it's about a quarter or less that tithe. Of the people that are giving, it's about 2.5% of their income on average. And so when you just look at that, you can argue about tithe and what we're called to today, but, one way to look at it would be churches today are operating at about 25% of what God intended for the church to have. And so if you just put that into perspective, what could your church do if you had 4 times the money that you had today? What impact would happen? You could look at the economy and say, well, it's really hard right now. Just 2.5% is what people are able to give. Well, that could partially be true, but if you even just look to the Great Depression, that statistic was 3.3%. So it's gone down even when we have maybe a better economic condition. And I would say it's not about the ability to give, it's about the heart issue, again, tying it to discipleship. And so, just practically entering in and teaching classes on it is really helpful.
Give it to me straight. What is one takeaway or action item every pastor needs to take from this episode?
We're doing 2 more episodes on this topic, so tune in for those. They're going to go to the next level, so that's the main takeaway. I will say, as kind of a bonus, we do have a longer video on our website, the 5 critical actions to cultivate generosity with your church. So I'd also recommend taking a look at that. That will be in the notes.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Dan. We'll catch you next week.
All right. Thanks, Kira.